Welcome back to Small Steps, Big Change. Last week's episode with Chamique Holdsclaw dove into overcoming adversity and rebounding from trauma. This week's guest, Joanne McCallie, also known as Coach P to her players and colleagues, has a very similar story to Chamique. And as a coach, the stigma can be even worse. Coach P shows us the power of storytelling and drives home the idea that the need for more education, action, and overall change to the stigma-filled narrative about brain health is more important than ever. Welcome to Small Steps, Big Change, the podcast where we meet extraordinary people who have used small steps to help create big change. I'm your host, Drew Sullivan. In August of 2020, after years of alcohol and cocaine use, I hit rock bottom. I knew at this moment that I had no choice but to get sober. Through lots of hard work and dedication, I made that a reality. I have to admit, I thought that this would fix everything and that a life filled with happiness would just follow. But sobriety was only the first step for me. I had to be sober before I was ever going to rebuild my life and recover all that was lost. I kept going, focusing on the next right move, or as I call it, the next small step. I then took the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one. Every day is a journey for me, and I now believe that I'm in the middle of the most beautiful recovery story of all time. What I have learned is that my story has a lot in common with anyone looking to make big changes in their life. That's why it is time that we work together to make big things happen. Each week on this podcast, I will introduce you to a friend who has used small steps to help create their big change. We are all going through something, and it is my goal that by sharing our stories and bringing vulnerability and empathy to the forefront, we can learn from each other and take the small steps that are needed to create big change. Joanne Coach P. McCallie is a former NCAA Division I women's basketball head coach for 28 years, leading teams at Maine, Michigan State, and Duke, making National Coach of the Year and winning numerous championships at all three schools. She is the only coach in history to win Coach of the Year in 4 different conferences and then achieved that 5 times. And she is the only Division I head coach to lead 2 different programs to 30-win seasons with 3 national championship game appearances. She is also a winner in life. Coach P was diagnosed with bipolar disorder at age 30 while coaching at Maine. It was something she wanted to reveal for decades, but was counseled that it would be career suicide and distracting to her teams. Despite her struggles and dark times, including a bout with skin cancer, she successfully raised a family and continued to triumph in basketball. In 2021, she decided it was time to talk and became a mental health advocate and speaker, sharing her story to inspire and educate others on how to win without losing yourself. The result was her best-selling book, Secret Warrior, A Coach and a Fighter, on and off the court, and numerous speaking engagements where she shares her story. Welcome to the podcast, Coach B. How are you?
Oh, wonderful. It's been a great week, World Mental Health Day. And
Absolutely.
yeah, it's been good.
I shared many of the impressive highlights and accomplishments that you've had over the years when I introduced you, but I didn't want to speak for you when speaking about your mental health. To help paint the picture for our listeners, would you share a little bit around when your mental health journey heightened and how difficult it was to be going through this experience, but also in such a stigma-filled world, the sports industry?
My situation, I've been living with bipolar disorder for 27 years, and I was diagnosed at age 30. It was difficult. I had become a head coach at 26 with lots of pressures. And then I gave birth to my first child at 29. And then the next September, a manic episode broke that certainly I did not understand. And what made it difficult, I think, is you have to remember this was a long, long time ago. And nobody even spoke the words mental health or mental health impairment. No one understood. No one would ever talk about it. So it was a stigma beyond stigmas because of the timing of when I was diagnosed.
One thing about your story that I found really special when we first met and then started working together was your mindset around making changes in your life. You have so much optimism, and I pride myself on having a similar mindset. It's important to also know that we had such a great connection, even when we first met, when we didn't even know each other. It was pretty special when you get to represent someone whose story is so close to your own. I think it is one of the greatest gifts that actually my career brings me, and the opportunity I have to share other stories and help elevate them. I have many who do this type of work for me as the beneficiary as well, not in business, but in life. You must have had some special people who were part of your community who supported you throughout this journey. You can share specific names or just generalize, but can you share a little bit about how people rallied behind you?
Sure. First, I want to say that wonderful kinetic energy that we shared is that is a mutual feeling. When I met you, I was so excited. Yes, for APB, but our stories and how that connected. So that's been super, super cool. I want to say also that this process is interesting. You do not go it alone, but you weave your way through the vulnerability aspect where you're okay not to be okay and you're trying to figure it all out. And it's very, very scary. And then so it's vulnerability and then it's survivorship, which is to the nth degree, trying to survive what you've been told about yourself and how you're going to cope. And then years later for me, now past, a couple of years, then you're trying to thrive with it. I call it thrivership. So you pass through those three elements, but think how long it's taken me to be able to do that. I mean, that's 27 years of process. It's fairly extraordinary to think about. In terms of people, I had a very small circle. I couldn't trust anyone. I had to hide getting my medication. I wouldn't tell a soul. So you've got my partner, John, you've got a couple of friends in Maine and my family. And I have to say, my family was wonderful, particularly my sister. But my mom and dad were sort of like, what is this? And, that's like saying, why are you the way you are? I mean, that's a stinger. And they didn't mean it to be that way, but they were a generation further removed. And I remember my mom, very British mom, she's talking with me at the dinner table and she said, my goodness, how did you get this? Like I caught a cold or something. And I was like, Mom, well, I'm really not sure. I mean, it's genetic a little bit. I don't know how I got this. It was kind of a nice tease conversation, but I have to tell you, it was a dart. I mean, it was a dart. And I was like, wow. So family can be interesting as they grapple. And the blame game shifts 9 different ways. What did I do? Was that part of me? Where did that come from? Is that a distant uncle?
I have goosebumps right now as I've had these exact conversations with my own family and close inner circle. You mentioned your sister and how she was there for you. I have two sisters, both are wonderful, but my younger sister has really been a consistent warrior for me. She's found ways to stay positive, even during the darkest of times. And it's really important to surround yourself with people who have your back when others may not, especially with our situations, as the blame game is totally real. And I try to combat that blame game by not only normalizing my past, but also my present. It is important to know where we have been, but just as important to know how far we have come. The present should never be forgotten. I make it my responsibility to consistently remind my loved ones that we are on this journey together and that my success is theirs as well. These relationships with loved ones are constantly evolving. I'm sure your close relationships have evolved over time as well. Have they?
It definitely evolved and things grow stronger through time. I think one of the difficulties is when you share trauma with somebody. When I was hospitalized, number one, the first time at age 30, my sister was in that hospital with me. And I know that she couldn't believe what she was seeing with my behavior. So she suffered a trauma. And the hardest thing is, how do you make up for that? You can't say you're sorry because it hits you on the back of the head, this thing that happened. And whether it's my situation or addiction or ever, it overcomes you and it hurts other people. But yet it's very hard to come around and say you're sorry because you're grappling with it. So it's a circular thing. And I think it's very difficult to manage. I've had two hospitalizations, one when I just started coaching and one when I left coaching. So that's very strange. The endpoints of my time as a coach. And along that way, people hurt for you and you can never take that away. And in an argument, you can say, I'm sorry. I apologize for the way I was in that argument. But this is a much deeper thing. And I guess it's a challenge, but I'm not sorry. I can't be sorry. Getting back to your question, some people, I had some person, not a family member, but a close person say to me, I can't read your book. And I said, why? And they said, because I want to know you as you were. I thought of that. I'm like, wait a minute, but this is who I am. And this is who I have been, as a coach and a successful coach. And I have to underline that because in adversities, we all think it's all bad. The coaching thing and my disorder went together, and it's complicated for people to understand that. But I was a much better coach when I recognized who I was and had balance with it. Much better coach. I mean, there's no question. I mean, how did you go to a national championship in 5 years with a program that was kind of at the bottom? That's hell. I guess I'm talking with all the correct subjects here, but it's an extraordinary thing. And I think that leftover residue of relationships and trauma that you cause, that is extremely painful.
Totally. And I think that you need to, I feel like I've said it in almost every conversation that we've had, is this idea that if you do not take your trauma and your past and fully come to terms with what it is, and that doesn't mean you have to publicly share with the world in that way, but with yourself. And for everyone that's different, I believe that you need to have even one person in a community for you to share that with to be able to really move past it. But I do know other people that have had just more personal reckoning with their trauma, and they've been able to separate growth moving forward and their past, but you can't get rid of it. It doesn't go away. To hear that someone said to you, it's basically what they meant to say is, I don't want to know who you are. I want to know who I knew. And I want to keep our relationship the way it is. And then what you're saying is like, okay, well, just so you know, that's not who I am. And what do you do as a human? Do you say, okay, then I'm going to keep this relationship going in a direction that isn't authentic and real? But by the time that you're past the trauma, past the addiction, past the struggle, I don't really want to do anything that isn't authentic and real. So it's like when I look at those friendships, I say to myself, like, okay, wait, like I want to respect what you want. And I know that you may not want to hear that sobriety has done this to me and recovery has done this to me. And the world could be so much better, because I've had so many that have said, you're just speaking from your soapbox. And why are you X, Y, and Z? And I'm like, no, because I feel it. And because when I look at the way that you might be living your life, or the people you surround yourself with, or the people that we used to be, I see that old person and I don't see who I really am. And so the same way that it's hard for people to get to know who we really are, it's also hard for us to go back to the people that they knew when we've come through the trauma the way we have. And I think that that bottles down into fear. And I heard a long time ago, fear, I think it can have like two meanings. And it's, you can forget everything and run, or face everything and rise. Right. And so it's like, and you can choose which one works for you. And I find so much comfort in being able to freely share my story, and especially with the community that I share. It's been powerful for me being surrounded by people that I can say addict and I can say alcoholic, and I can carry on with that conversation normally because it's real.
Mhm.
And it's who I was, which in turn is who I am, exactly what you said. And we don't get to leave our trauma behind. It's kind of like, we're all getting on the plane, but we can send the trauma to checked luggage. It doesn't have to come sit with us, right? But it's going on the journey. It just doesn't have to be part of how we identify and how we show up. But it can't be forgotten. Like, how do you now finesse? Because I do believe it's a finesse kind of skill, is how do you finesse weaving in your past and that trauma, but also move forward in a positive way to, build stronger tomorrows?
Well, I think, I don't know, this is going to sound bad, and I don't know if I should say this, but for me, you're talking about fear. That to me means the idea of F everyone and run toward it. I mean, at some point, you have to shed everyone else's fear, and you have to shed it, and it can hit you like a magnet. And being, I'm not a big swearer,
Same.
but I will say there's a time where you have to say, like, that's it. I'm not going to carry your fear. I'm not. And so run towards it. Take that
Yeah.
word run and turn around and go right after anything that you are fearful of. And I always let people know. Somebody on a Zoom said to me, I'm an introvert. How do I make those human connections? And I said, well, there are technical ways, how you do that, coffees and connection and all these things and notes and whatever. And I said, but honestly, that's your fear. And you need to run and you need to have that pain. You have to have that discussion and interaction with pain and fear. You have to recognize what it is. And I'm kind of being, tongue in cheek when I say everyone, but there is a time where it's like a coating around you and it sloughs off. And it's a very powerful thing to be in that space. And in regard to anyone who doesn't understand, I just have empathy or sympathy or patience if they don't want to know, because I am not a bipolar person. I'm a coach with bipolar disorder and it's a part of me. It's not all of me. And what I've loved about this sort of experience of sharing worldwide or nationwide is the fact that people can actually come up to me. And that's what's been something to manage. It's a new thing where people come and tell their stories. I have a son, I have a daughter. Do you have any words of wisdom? You're on the golf course, someone walks up to you, you're in the grocery store. And so it's a new thing and it's much more profound than somebody coming up to you and say, oh, great win over Michigan or great win over North Carolina, where people would seek you out as a public figure to be in your world of athletics, especially the successes. And occasionally people giving you dirty looks after a loss and so forth. So there's that domain of coaching, which is really, and it's wonderful. I love sport and sport metaphors have helped me be a better speaker and teacher. But this is really a dense world I'm in now. This,
Yeah, of
this is life or death, not to be dramatic, but in a way, it is.
course it is.
I mean, people have lost so many people with this. I mean, sons and daughters, and it's an overwhelming thing to,
Yeah.
to see these things happen. So sometimes you got to really get after it. Like it's like you're in a huddle and you're like, enough.
I'm so grateful that you just said that because I feel very similar. Lately, I've had some people that have said to me, your recovery is really loud. And I said, what does that really mean? And they said, well, you just like to talk about it a lot. And I said, well, storytelling is important and storytelling is super powerful. And if we don't tell our stories, how are we helping others that may not be ready to tell their stories? Usually I will tell people, a lot more people that are struggling with addiction than you think. And they'll say, no, I just don't know that many people. And I'll say, no, you just don't know many people that are publicly talking about it. There's so many people that are privately going through addiction that it really needs people that are willing to share their stories loud and proud as ways to help those that are not able to tell their stories and are not able to navigate the stigma-filled waters of addiction. And so I compare it very much to this idea of the It Gets Better campaign, right? The It Gets Better campaign is in place to say it gets better to young gay, lesbian, transgendered youth and to tell them that life is kinder than what you're experiencing and it will get better. And I think that there's a missed phrase there because the only way that things get better, even within the hate and the lack of equality that we see in the LGBTQIA plus community, it gets better, but it only gets better if you really want it to get better. You have to make sure that you yourself are getting better in order for you to show up to the community and for the community to show up to you. And so what does that take? Well, that takes people telling their stories, being very loud, but it also means that they are respecting and supporting those that are unable to tell their stories really loud. That's how a community gets better, is when you can feel comfortable being who you are, sharing what you want to share at the speed and at the pace that you want to. And I think that, in order to do that in the mental health space or in the addiction space, we have to be the people telling our stories and we have to be the people that are championing other stories for those that are not able to share them themselves. So, my question for you is, knowing that you were on the side of coaching and that you left coaching to share this story and to be a voice to others, I don't think you ever truly left coaching. I just think you left coaching basketball for the time being. You've been coaching life, and never forget that, because Chamique said it last week. that people have asked her to coach basketball, but she says, I'm coaching life because of the experience she's had. And I feel the same. And I know you do as well. But you also haven't left coaching off the table. You haven't taken it off the table. You haven't said it's never going to happen again. And that's coaching basketball. So my question is that do you think you'll ever go back to coaching? And if you do you think your process in which you would choose a new team would be different than years past based on the knowledge that you've gained around your bipolar disorder?
Yeah, that's interesting to say. And I think we're loud and proud.
Yeah.
I think that's part of who we are. And I also want to address the amazing connections you have, sometimes intuitively and sometimes overtly. For example, there are two beautiful women, my neighbors, and they're married, and they've been married for about the same time that I've been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, I think 26 years. And I marvel at them because I look at them and say, wait a minute, you came out to your parents, you got married at a time when it was not accepted in any way. I mean, it's stigmatized to the nth degree. And so you get this sort of these connections with different people that I look at them and say, you were warriors. There was nothing secret about you. And, I ask the questions, how did your family take this? How did you do this? And they smile, and say, well, we just did. And I said, well, to me, that's the ultimate because you're out in front. You're totally out in front at a time where obviously being gay was not accepted. And we know there are so many problems today with that issue. So I really bonded with them as we moved in to their turf in the neighborhood. I was sort of stunned by their story and I continue to marvel at them. So that's part of a neat thing where you connect. And I've always almost felt this immediate empathy with anyone that was holding something. And sometimes you could really feel it. Like they're holding something, just like I had to hold something. And so there's this commonality with it. And I talk about that a little bit in the book. I sort of cover that. But in regard to coaching, well, there's a couple of things. I don't think I ever could go back because, as you said, it's too big of an audience and a chance to help make change now. I mean, if I'm doing a Zoom for 3,000 people, well, already you've far surpassed the number of players. So it's quite clear that this is my direction. And I've been pulled into this, and this is what I'm supposed to do. But I will say that the audiences of student athletes and students, high school, that's a critical audience. High school students, college students. And so I'm really in tune to wanting to be in that space, because I would love to address those groups over and over again because they need the repetition. Because one thing they don't have that I had was generally they don't have a partner that's really invested in them. I mean, they might be in a relationship, but they're young. And so where do they fall back? What do they fall back to? And when we talk about the fear factor, they're surrounded by fear. They may have a dear friend who finds out that they're gay or bipolar, whatever they are, and might run, just bam, discard. And I talk about the discard. That has got to be one of the most incredible things when somebody just vaporizes out of your life and you're left wondering, wow, what was that all about? It really shakes you to the core. So I've had some of that happen. And then when we go back to those younger people, my gosh, the aloneness from any of those experiences, I can imagine. And when I have spoken, Mississippi State, Tennessee Tech, and others, I do have kids come up to me and say, I'm so alone. And I was thinking that this was the way. And I'm a coach, so I can say, are you kidding me? That is not an option. So we're just going to have to sit here and talk about this. That is not an option. And I can perhaps say things that are not woke. I can go outside parameters and reach and push and say, come on, suicide's not an option. Okay, so let's just get it off the table. I'm not saying tough it up when I say that. I'm saying pull people to you, pull those connections, put yourself in situations. I don't care if you go to some, get together and you just sit there and don't engage, but get around people. You never know who you're going to meet, but if you sit alone in a room, nothing's going to happen. No energy's going to be there. And then the other thing I tried to push a lot is get super busy. This idea that I'm not feeling well, I'm down and depressed. Okay, exercise till you drop. I don't care if you're not an athlete. Take a walk that's longer than you've ever taken, but it's the routine, it's the habits. You've got to push yourself to it, not isolate. And so there's a thought process that we have to get to. And
Yeah.
yeah, we're trying to get there.
One thing that I've been thinking about lately has been regret. And a lot of people don't want to talk about regret. No regrets. We hear that all the time. I always think that it's important to have realistic regret. It's not supposed to be anything that we get down on ourselves for, but it is a reminder of why we never want to go back to the place we were in, but also to continue to do the work to stay in the place that we're at. Because when you look back on opportunities that you've lost, it reminds you of what you're capable of when you are healthy and when you do take care of yourself, of how much you can gain. I specifically think of how this situation could have impacted you from a recruitment side of things. I know that right now there's such a strong conversation around mental health in athletics. And I just feel that, especially with the culture around young people today and how open and honest they are with their mental health and how much of a priority they make when it comes to dealing with it. And I think that if you were on the recruitment trail and you were talking to potential student athletes and you were open and honest around your own story, that could have really impacted you positively to gain the rapport of those young student athletes and the trust. I think of Sha'Carri Richardson, at LSU, an Olympic sprinter who didn't go to Tokyo because of the positive cannabis test, but has been very open around her struggles with her mental health. If you had been that track coach that was recruiting her, I can only imagine how the experience would have been super empowering for the two of you to be able to have the conversation. And I just think that it could have really been something that would have been special down the line when it came to you dealing with your own story and your own journey, but also being such a support to those that are going through their own. Have you thought about how you would have recruited differently and how you would have navigated that part of your job differently in the past if you had the ability to share your story more authentically and just more, raw to the world?
I do. I think couple thoughts there. When I was 26, I was a head coach. So the years 26, 27, 28, 29, those 4 years, I was by far my most difficult coach ever, most challenging ever, undiagnosed. Yes, we won a ton, but as a communicator and a relationship builder, I could have been so much better. Then being diagnosed at 30, the freedom I had within, first, you have freedom within yourself and the small group around you. And that's enough at the time. Like this has to go in steps, right? This is a small step kind of thing. Because if you don't do it in small steps, you're launched out into a world that you are unable to handle all of the feedback, the pushback. Like it's just overwhelming. It's small steps on how you build something. And I was lucky to be able to take those small steps. So when I was at Maine, there was no way I was going to speak about it because we had done many great things, but I was still within myself coping. Leaving Maine, part of leaving Maine was a fresh start at Michigan State. I didn't even have a therapist at Michigan State. I kept my psychiatrist back in Maine. I was so balanced. I was taking my meds. I told myself that you have to have ultimate success, I think, sometimes before you share because you want to share the whole story. And so when we played for a national championship in 2005, I wanted to speak about it. I wanted to use the platform, and that was a big platform. And I had a colleague say to me very frankly, if you do that, you will be the bipolar coach. You will not be Coach P with a bipolar disorder. And although that's hard to take, it is true. And I don't think I would ever got to do because athletic directors, I love many and I've had great ones, but there's something around them where they always looking behind them. They're always looking. Like, I don't want to offend anybody. I want to give to the student athletes. I want people to like me. There's a thing about them that I don't think anyone would have taken a chance on me. I mean, it would have stopped at Michigan State because I coached a national title. I think would have been embracing. See, because I kind of shown, look here kind of thing. But the number one reason why I didn't share while a public figure in coaching is for my players. Because you can say, well, it could have helped your players, but no, it would have put the focus on me. Every media press conference, how are you feeling, coach? The whole directional towards mental health impairment and watching me like a hawk.
Oh yeah, if you got upset at a call, it would always be like, oh, she must be
my,
having an episode. It wouldn't be, oh, that was just a bad call.
right. It over and over again. Oh my gosh, that's your bipolar self. I'm an Italian British coach. Okay, I'm animated. I'm very tough coach, very fair coach, and you have to help drive your teams to a future image. So there is a struggle there. I mean, there is a push-pull.
Oh yeah.
Conflict is part of the deal. You do not get, I mean, you have to have conflict. The Elite Eights we went to at Duke, I mean, there is a push-pull with players. Some don't believe quite as much that they could be as good. Some think they're better than they are. And then some are just all Americans and players that are just incredible. So there's this whole thing going on. And I just felt that, I can't take away from that because we're a team.
Yeah.
We're all parts of this thing. And so, and we're building. And so I realized, that was a good directional for me. I have to get out. And then the thing that really pushed me out was I got to a point where I just felt it was time. I don't know. It was just, it's time. I just knew it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wrote Secret Warrior very quickly. That was just a 3-month wow, and now I'm writing fiction and that is so much harder.
Yeah.
But the nonfiction thing is so much easier. And I just felt it was perfect time to pass the torch. And then COVID hit.
Yeah.
Incredible that the book is published before COVID, right before.
Yeah.
I never ever like that just happened.
Yeah. I love this idea that those of us that have been dealing with hard situations for years are able to come in now and be those secret warriors for those that are publicly dealing with so much of what COVID brought us. Because so many people are dealing with the backlash of what happened during COVID, whether that is marital issues, mental health, addiction. A lot of people are talking about burnout at work and the whole silent quitting. A lot of people are dealing with the repercussions of a 2.5-year worldwide pandemic. And I believe that it is those that have been dealing with a lot of hardship for years, like you and I, that are able to come in and help our friends and our peers and our family members through the times that COVID brought. Because a lot of people are dealing with these situations for the first time in their life, or at least the first time with the volume that they're getting now. And I think that these same people are able to impact us in ways that we don't know. So there's really this idea around what our communities can do for us. And so you talk a lot about that in The Secret Warrior. It's this idea of the number of secret warriors that were a part of your tribe and a part of your squad. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, initially, back in the day, I wasn't exposed to any. There was no role model. There was no mentor. I had a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
Like, that's it. Me and my psychiatrist. I had a very good one in Bangor, Maine. And so initially, there's nowhere to go. And then fast forward to coaching at Duke, and we got Chamique to come in for mental health day, mental health awareness.
Oh, that's awesome.
And the thing about that is, I could have pushed the envelope at Duke. I mean, no program had that day. And then no program said, okay, we had that, KYOW.
Yes.
Or, have the different days. But in this case, mental health awareness
This
day.
was during a game. Like this was a game day.
Yeah, a game day.
Wow. I love that.
Like we dedicated, but it
So
was
similar to like the pink game.
yeah, right. It was the green game. Right?
Wow. I love that.
It was the green game. And it was interesting how it came about because I felt pushback. And then I felt huge gratefulness, or people were gratified that we would bring that to the community. And Chamique was the speaker at halftime, the guest speaker, and she could share her story, which she does so brilliantly. I mean, she's just a wonderful person. And she shared that Kyrie donated the shoes because the shoes were green and blue, Duke blue and green. And so we worked hard to have this day. And again, 80% of people were thrilled. We had on the concourse, we had all these things like pet therapy,
Oh,
massage.
I love that.
It was all up there. But again, 20% of people were like, that doesn't belong at Duke. You know
Wow.
what I mean? Using sport like that. In other words, just coach your team. That was part of it. But think about it. When I push the envelope, you can't say that out loud. I could hear that internally or see that. Again, a small percentage.
They're the secret enemies.
Yeah. I mean, and I think they're the most fearful.
Yeah.
Anyone who has run from or done something sort of inappropriate or whatever with mental health impairment, I look at them and I want to get a little closer because I'm thinking,
What's wrong?
yeah, what's wrong? What are they? Because you're repelled. Those people will push back on something that's close. I think I said that right. But the point is, it was a beautiful thing. And we
Yeah.
did it for my years. We did that for I think my final 4 years at Duke. We did that. And I was proud of that. And I was happy for that. And I had dealt with a lot of women at Duke, just like Michigan State or Maine, that had issues that couldn't always get help. There was no directives. Waiting for an appointment with a psychiatrist could take weeks,
Yeah.
yet they were a student athlete asked to represent the school. I witnessed things internally, again, with mental health impairment, some things pushed under the rug a little bit. There's that thing that happens. And then I want to say on the flip side, there was a coach at a college that I spoke at, really great question, raised his hand and said, we're expected to win. If we don't win, we're fired. And I am very comfortable with mental health impairment. But what I'm not comfortable with is the random assessment a student athlete could make about their health and saying, I need a mental health day. But what's my recourse? Because they just take mental health days during practice and so forth. And I said, that's an excellent question. And that's a fair question. And I said, accountability is really important. So I said to him, I said, if you have a student athlete that needs a mental health day, of course you're going to grant that. However, attached to that is appointments with therapists and follow-up and human connection. They don't just take off to their dorm, right? So if you have a mental health day, that's fine. But you should be meeting with somebody and you should have a care team and you should have a care plan. This is not a random thing. And people can't diagnose themselves. Oh, I must be bipolar. No. I have anxiety. Well, yes, you probably do, that heaviness in your heart, but you have to take the steps. You cannot be solo and then just raise your hand and say, Coach, I need to be gone for a day.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't work that way. And that's one of the things I really speak about is accountability. I can't have bipolar disorder and not take my meds and not see my doctor and not exercise, party like a mad woman. And I can't do all that and say, oh, now I'm sorry, I can't do my Zoom tomorrow. That doesn't work. You have to have the structure. It's not perfect. We're not perfect. And so that side of the equation is harder for people to talk about unless you've been in it. It's hard. I mean, we've got to take care of ourselves. The be good to you thing.
I think that it has a similar overlap and parallel just in the corporate world too. And I think weaponize is the wrong word, but I also think making an excuse is also the wrong word. But whatever it is, people use their trauma, their shortcomings, whatever their story is, at times inappropriately in ways that their reasoning is right, but their process, the accountability, the making sure that you are addressing it in a healthy way is lost. And I think that that's where leaders in general run into problems of talking about these things, whether it's coaching young people in the workplace, a teacher in a classroom. Those conversations are difficult because you don't know exactly the steps that someone has taken, on their side, and you really have to go off of their word for it. But I think you brought up a really good point around when we hold people accountable to just what the expectation of the job is as a student athlete or as an employee, we then welcome their feedback to tell us what is something that they can do and what is something that they can't do. And then that gives you the opportunity to then make accommodations based on where the person is at. If that reality or what they're going through is not shared with you, then how are you supposed to make those accommodations? And so my question, is what do you recommend to leaders, when they are faced with challenges around the right thing to say or how to address a situation or how to approach a young person that they think might be struggling, or that it's not just I need a mental health day for the sixth time this semester or the third time this quarter? How do you start those conversations around, is everything okay? How can I
Yeah,
help you?
it's tricky, isn't it? Brain health. Some people don't like the term brain health. I'm amazed by. I love the term brain health. Okay, brain health like heart health. So I have heart problems. I don't necessarily have to share those with my employer, right? I have heart problems. I take my heart medicine. I do what I'm supposed to do, and I'm an employer, and I do my very best because I'm healthy. Okay, brain health. You're at your best when your brain is balanced. So let's talk about brain health. Let's talk about heart health. The reason I bring those two together is everyone's very comfortable talking about heart health. Even though if something bad happens, that's important. Our heart, it's got to be healthy. Heart surgeons are very valued, right? I'm a heart surgeon. Wonderful. And so we have to work on the language over and over again. You have mental health awareness, super. You have mental health, great. You have mental health impairment, great. But all of this goes under an umbrella, and it's brain health. I mean, no one says heart impairment. I mean, I get it. We constantly are evolving with language. And the more language evolves, the more people will feel comfortable and can share or not share. And if I'm a leader, one of the ways I can help my group is just to be transparent that no one's life has been perfect. And if I'm able to share, so if I have a group that I lead, if I'm able to share a little bit about my story and sort of self deprecate through it, it sends a wave of calm over other individuals that are struggling with different things that may not be able to speak it. Then we have to check up with people, a care team, somebody in a company. Okay, are you doing what you need to do to get where you're supposed to be? And so it's a definite balancing act, and it's not perfect. And we want the highest productivity. And I try to remind leaders, if you invest in the people that work for you and they're at their optimal brain health, then the productivity and the success of your firm, I mean, you're just through the roof. And the energy you create in your spaces is going to be better than any other place. And so people that say, oh, this might cost money or this is too much or whatever they say about this, they're really short sighted. And I would call them kind of an old fashioned leader.
Yep.
If they're old fashioned, they don't get it. They just don't get it. And those leaders that are just, bang, 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 are, being removed to the leader who can lead from behind. You're either in the front of the train or behind the train. And if you're a great leader, you can lead from the front, stories, self-deprecation. This is who I am. And then you can get to the caboose and have others lead. And so it's this constant process. So
Yeah.
brain health does not discriminate. There's no right or wrong here in the sense of we have to keep the dialogue going. And we have to share and be honest. And I just know some people can take offense or not, or whatever they want to do, but we have to get more language and continue. So I pull the brain health train, and people, that's because it's so all encompassing
Yeah.
what we're doing.
Yeah. Before my last question, and then we'll finish up with our takeaway 10 is you mentioned Kay Yao, and I think I've mentioned to you before, that I overlap in your world as I helped Gino Oriema with his efforts with the V Foundation when I was at UConn, and his wife, Kathy. And one thing that, that I think leaders and more coaches in general is that idea that you are in charge or are you leading a charge? There's a difference. And I think that people miss that. And one thing that I noticed just firsthand when I was around the Yukon program was this idea of just 10, 12, 15, whatever it was, girls, young women, powerful, talented young women coming together to be able to do what they do year in and year out. And I think that when you look at that, you're like, okay, that's a coach that's leading the charge. And then I think we can all look at coaches that throughout time in college sport, but in professional sport that you look at and you're like, okay, they wish they were that player still, or they wish that they were that person that was kind of behind the scenes, but not really behind the scenes. They want to be in front of that camera. They want to take that credit. And I think that when you see people that are willing to put their team in front of them, but then also be in front of that team when they need to be, that's the richness of leadership. But it's not always easy. And when you mentioned Kay Yao and as I said, the V Foundation, that was, I mean, Jim Belvano and that SV speech that I learned about years after it happened, but when it came kind of in my orbit, I think it led me to where I'm at today because it was the first time that I saw a speaker. As I said, it was a recording because it was years later. But when I saw that, the SV speech and when I heard the words come out of his mouth and when you see him pair his coaching journey, but then also with this story of struggle, but then also just the passion and the resilience that he had. That type of storytelling is what leads us as onlookers and as people that are just, experiencing others and their stories. That's what allows us to dream and that's what allows us to see better days. And I think that coaches have keys to be able to help people in that way, but I also know that if you're not helping yourself, it's really hard to help others. And so, at this point where you're at and your journey, how do you practice self-care? I mean, like, what is your routine? You mentioned routine. I have one that is pretty regimented, and my partner doesn't always love it. Trust me, he does not always love it, but he knows the value of it and he knows how much it impacts me. And I think it's inspired him to create his own routines too. So how do you practice self-care? That could be on a personal level, could be on a family level.
Yes. One caveat there, Gino and Kathy are wonderful people. I just want to say that. And I also want to say that you often have to be in charge and leading the charge. And there's so much of the in charge that people don't see. When I had to tackle a woman in a panic attack and squeeze her and hold her and tell her it was going to be okay, I was very much in charge. And that advocacy has to be there. Leading a charge usually comes later in a program, right? You have to be in charge when you get there. You have to set the velocity, all these things. So what I'm saying is there's always a push-pull with in charge and leading a charge. And then the very best teams, as Gino has had many, 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 yes, they're leading the charge. Diana Taurasi, Sue Bird, Paige Beckers, all these people, they're leading the charge. And that's a place you get to, over time. So I have a lot of respect for what Gino has accomplished at Connecticut. Getting to the self-care, it's the basic things. Exercise. I exercise 6 days a week. I mix it up. I swim. I play tennis. Occasional golf. That's not much exercise, but it's really good for the mind. I do whatever I can to be active. Lift weights is a great one. I think that's very important for how you feel after you do that. I work with a trainer. I am fortunate I'm able to do that. But back in the day, as I grew in my lifetime, always with groups, always working out with people at gyms or classes or things of that nature. I go to bed at the same time every night. I wake up at the same time in the morning. There's a structure to my sleep routine and pattern. I have to take a bath every night. That sounds funny, but I do. It's the only way I decompress. When I travel to speak and I have to make sure there's a bath in my hotel. It's really funny because these hotels don't have baths anymore. They're ripping them out left and right. Many times I've given up a beautiful suite, no bath, to take a much smaller room, bathtub. These choices you make are pretty funny, but they're very real. I have to do that. I believe in an infrared sauna. I believe in anything that makes you sweat. So, a steam sauna, anything that just, sweat pours off you. That's one of the most effective means of water. I love the ocean. I love being around water anywhere. Pets are incredible. We've always had a dog. The house is empty without a dog. If people can do that, there's just some simple things. And then the higher level things, human connection. I know when to call girlfriends. I know when to be around them. I need my girlfriends. You have to have different circles. I go sit with my neighbors outside and we just hang out and I need a quiet moment. And you have to be able to identify these things. There are moments where I do withdraw, but appropriately so, to write, to read, to think, to prepare talks. That's okay. There are times when I want to withdraw and I know it's not the time. Like, don't do that. Go to a movie with friends, get out, see something different. So you have to, unfortunately, for all of us these days, it's hard to kind of look at yourself. I talk out loud all the time in my house, in my car, in the shower. I try to reframe things in my mind. If I think I did an okay job on something here, I try to work through it and frame it so it's a positive experience. Sometimes people think that's kind of nutty. It's a cognitive behavioral therapy at the layman's level or lady woman's level where you teach yourself. So there's so many things that you can do. And we've got to work with them. And you can be better than ever. You can be better than you've ever been. And that message needs to be out there.
Yeah. Well, the last part of the podcast is our takeaway 10. It's 10 questions that I ask every guest. So let's get started. Always makes you laugh.
Great people, energy, like you just the way you said that.
If you could ask one person one question, who would it be and what would you ask?
Oh, Arthur Ashe, his Days of Grace book is one of my favorites. And I would ask him how he did it, how he handled AIDS. How did he do that at a time, again, where stigmas, taboos?
We
Yeah.
represented him back in the day. Our CEO, Bob.
My gosh.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah. What advice do you have for young people entering the workplace? Or in general, just what advice for young people?
Mentorship matters. Find mentors. Find people that have done what you want to do. Listen, learn, work harder than you've ever worked, but definitely don't go it alone in your career. There has to be people out there that have accomplished amazing things. Read their books, try to get to know them in some way. You don't have to know them personally, but you can study people. You can literally, I studied people. I studied Pat Summitt. I wasn't Pat Summitt's best friend. I studied her. She became a reference for me. Sue Gunter at LSU, fabulous woman. She also was a reference for me. I studied Nick Saban. I studied him. I got to shadow him for a day. Izzo, I was with him for 7 years. I studied what he did, went to his practices. Coach K, with him for 13 years. So you have to make the effort and recognize that you have lots to learn. And it's going to be a great journey. Great journey. And don't worry about money. When you follow your passion, that will come.
Yeah, I feel that. How should we measure our lives? In years, in moments, in accomplishments, something else?
The affect we've had, the people that was made better. People will remember how you made them feel.
I love that. Name one thing about yourself that will never change.
Never change, never change, never change. Well, I'm very curious. I mean, to a fault at times. So that's never going to change. I'm going to ask questions. What do they say? Curiosity killed the cat or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm very, very curious. And that's just who I am. I don't know.
If you could, would you really want to live a life that is free from challenges or obstacles?
Oh, gosh, no. No, I mean, adversity makes you. I can't imagine without adversity. I mean, it's part of the equation. It's the first thing. It's the first pillar of success. Adversity.
Which 3 people, past or present, would you invite to a dinner party?
Oh gosh, that question is so hard because you don't know which tangent to go on. I don't know. I mean, I mentioned Arthur Ashe. I was so struck as a kid. I was younger then. It's funny how much he struck me. It's almost was a forecasting maybe that I was going to deal with some kind of stigma. So I mentioned him. I wouldn't cook the dinner because I'm not a great cook, but I think about, well, Maggie Thatcher, I'm British. So then you've got Arthur Ashe and Maggie Thatcher, and then maybe John Wooden.
That's a heck of a dinner.
But, the reason I can't answer that is there are so many.
Yeah.
I mean, what plane do you go on? That's a very difficult
And what kind of food do you eat? That's the harder question too.
Yeah.
How do you define a community? And I know you're part of one, but that would be the second part. Are you a part of one? But I know you are. So
Oh, a community is this wonderful, diverse group of individuals I've got a community here that's incredibly diverse in Durham. And there's this amazing love of all things different. And it's easy. It's not an effort. It's not an effort to be inclusive. It's not something that's forced. There's this ease at which you operate in a community, loving people for all that they offer. And in my world here, Durham, I'm in a subset of Durham. It's very much the case there where we're all different. Every element of age, background, sexuality, you name it, we've got it. But there's a movement of it. And it's around a golf course. Like, this is kind of weird because golf can be so kind of old school. We've got a place where the women push the envelope and get the tee times.
I love that.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a eclectic mix of individuals from far and away, from, not all from Durham. We've all kind of arrived here. And I talk about that with my neighbors. What the comfort level of everyone is extraordinary.
Have you ever looked in the mirror and not recognized the person staring back?
Yes. I've had 3 episodes in my life. 2, I was hospitalized. And yes, I've looked in the mirror and said, who is that?
What are you grateful for in this moment?
Grateful for, obviously, health, family, friendships. That's everyone's kind of says that, but I'm really grateful for this journey. This interesting journey I'm on, trying to break through barriers. Again, a lot of people think they got it covered, with mental health. We don't need help or whatever. So I think this exciting journey, I'm as busy as I've ever been. I've got no paycheck per se because money is being raised towards a foundation. And it's really, really incredibly joyous.
Thank you so much, Coach P, for joining us today for this incredible discussion. We really appreciate your vulnerability in sharing your story and helping us combat the stigma around mental health. Your story is super inspirational. And even though we are all survivors at the end of the day, I really believe that the messaging here that we need to all take with us in our week is that we need to go from survivorship to thrivership. I hope everyone has a great week and continue to push forward, because together we can do the hardest things, I promise. And they only start with the first step. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Small Steps, Big Change podcast. I hope that this episode inspired you to let go of whatever is holding you back and take the first small step. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, follow our YouTube channel, the Small Steps, Big Change podcast, and connect with me on Instagram. Remember, no matter what you are going through, without taking small steps, you are limiting your potential to create big change. So take that first small step today. I promise you that you won't regret it.